Hey, Jonathan here at the Colfax High Mill and Woodshop. Today I was going to look at these two Festool sanders. One is the Rotex, the other the random orbital sander. I'm going to look at clamping down, their vac systems, and most importantly, how these two sanders compare. So stay tuned for this video. Okay, here we are in the high school wood shop. This student right here is doing a glue up for a cutting board. Here's a cedar slab that we milled. We take these slabs and we put them into coffee tables, end benches, dining room tables. So I thought I'd just go over what we do in here before I go over the sanders. So there's a glue up of the cutting board, and then after it dries, we plane it down flat. And then we take it over the CNC router and we cut our cutting boards out on the CNC router. So a lot of these woods are bought at Auburn Hardwoods, but usually there's an assortment of woods that we've milled and mixed in there. So this is a Techno CNC router. It's a great tool. Here the cutting board's getting cut out with a 1/4" flat end mill. Okay, on to our Festool sanders. I was very fortunate to get a grant to buy these. So here's my box full of sandpapers. I go from a series of, I think, 100, 120, 150, 180, and 220. So those are the box full of sandpapers. So here, the Velcro pads, really nice sandpapers. They actually last a long time. We actually reuse them as long as there's a lot of use left. So here's that student's cutting board straight off of the CNC router, getting clamped down on the MFT table. Similarly, the way we used to use bench dogs on the old table. So these things are nice because they stay below the profile of the cutting board. So clamping it up here, and then I'm going to start with the Rotex sander. You can see the waves still in here in the valleys from the planer. So this Rotex will do a beautiful job bringing those out. So the student sanding with the grain, pretty coarse, probably a 120 grit sandpaper. So sanding away with that Rotex does a beautiful job taking out those big waves. It is kind of big and heavy. A disadvantage of that Rotex is that it is probably $500, and the sanding pads are expensive, but surprisingly, those sanding pads work so well, they last really long. So one of the key things students have trouble with this Rotex is holding it flat and not kind of focusing on a single point. So she changed out sandpaper. The student here changed out sandpaper, is going to finer grit, moving it around. You know, the biggest issue really in sanding, and Festool is kind of the master of this, is to remove the dust. And you know, with that Rotex actually on the board and it not clamped down, you could almost pick that board up with the vacuum power of it. So the sandpapers are expensive, but they really last so long because the dust control from Festool is fantastic. The other thing that's amazing too, one problem we used to have with that Purdue strip in there, that dust would get into any light wood and mark it up. But with either of the Festool products, there's really no dust down at all, and obviously no dust to breathe. I do ask the students to put the sandpapers back if they're not worn out. So, you know, she's only doing, I don't know, a minute or two at every grit, and here she is swapping out to a little finer grit and putting it in, and then doing some more passes. And really, this isn't much time at all sanding compared to a regular orbital sander. So, you know, really for this job right here, the ETS 125 would work fine. It is a random orbital sander. The big difference between the Rotex and the ETS is the fact that the Rotex has that dual purpose between rotary and random orbital sanding. So here she is swapping out another sandpaper there, moving up to a finer grit. The ETS will work just as equally well here. The main reason I have that Rotex 125 in the first place is because we mill our own lumber and we have a lot of slabs, and we either plane those slabs if they're under 24, or we put them on on our big CNC router, and then we use the surfacing bit to get a flat plane. So we really take a lot of wood off after we're done either surfacing or planing. So the ETS would be a great sander for this. Equally, just as good sanding control, same sandpaper, 5-inch discs. It's kind of a worn out paper there. I'd probably throw that one away and get another one. There she is there. Oh, there's a beauty. There's a beauty. Only in a high school classroom would a kid get that thing to polish fine. Look at that. That thing is price. I mean, good Lord. So obviously, you got to change your sandpaper out a little more regularly than that. Okay, so there she is, just doing her finishing touches on her cutting board with the Rotex. Here's me working with it. I'm sanding really well. I like it because it's fast. It is expensive. It is kind of heavy, a little harder to control. And here's a dual action. So that right there, that spinning right there, is under the random orbital sander, and it spins freely. Then you could lock the gear mechanism, and now you see how that thing's locked. Now that is a gear driven sander, and that thing will hog wood like no other. So you could get things flat pretty quickly with that rotary engagement, and it's gear driven, and I absolutely love that. $500 a lot, but when you're sanding down slabs, there is nothing I've ever found that sands better than that rotary sander in the Rotex. Belt sanders, I mean, it really does the sanding of a belt sander, but without ever cutting any grooves. So I love the Rotex. I would highly recommend it. There's a variable speed on there. And I also like that ETS 125. It's a great sander. It is a $200 sander. You can see that sandpaper right there is a little worn. A lot of that cedar pitch. So the 125s are the 5-inch, and then the 150s are the 6-inch. I guess if I could do it all over again, I would probably get the Rotex 150, because we do sand down a lot of big slabs for tabletops. I mean, they are beautiful tools. As a high school wood shop, having tools in a high school wood shop is like loaning all your favorite tools out to your 90 worst neighbors every day. But I will say these two Festools have really held up beautifully. And I sometimes go back and forth between the philosophy to buy inexpensive tools and replace them frequently. But I think these Festools have paid for themselves. The Rotex 125 has been phenomenal. I used to have these Porter Cable random orbitals, and the Rotex has really taken that over. Here's that sanding disc. I'm just so unbelievably shocked that somebody would put that back. I mean, that you would sand so long, but it is. It's high school wood shop. Yeah, so I guess comparing these two, the Rotex is the best sander. Everything everybody's ever said about the Festool Rotex is worth it. If you're going to do natural edge boards, coffee tables, benches, there's nothing better than the Rotex, and I love that tool. The ETS 125 is a great sander too.